What happened when your husband tried to control you? Before we begin, pause for a moment. If you enjoy stories that are bold, satirical, and reveal the absurdities hiding in everyday life, then hit subscribe now and tap like. Because what you're about to hear is a story about control, rebellion, and the unexpected consequences of taking tradition too far. I was sitting at the breakfast table, the morning sun spilling across the counter, when I opened an article about climate change. I barely had time to sip my coffee when he slammed his cup down beside mine. "Would you stop trying to be so woke already?" he shouted. Our 3 teenage sons erupted in laughter, their voices bouncing off the walls, echoing my husband's amusement at my supposed folly. "Maybe focus on being a wife and mother instead of pretending you understand politics," he added. I took a deep breath. I tried to respond quietly. "I'm just trying to stay informed." But it was like throwing feathers at a storm. He snorted, shaking his head in mock disbelief. "Informed? You're brainwashed by all that woke garbage. I liked you better when you didn't have opinions. Life was simpler then. Women knew their place, and men could be men without apologizing." I paused, letting his words hang in the air. Then I made a decision that would reshape the entire household. The next morning, I quietly threw out his medications, blood pressure pills, anxiety meds, back pain medication. "All gone," I announced, trying to keep my voice calm. "Modern medicine is just liberal propaganda. Traditional men tough it out." His face paled. "That's prescribed," he protested. "By a female doctor," I reminded him. "We can't trust that." Then, with deliberate care, I arranged a new appointment with a male doctor 3 hours away, outside our insurance coverage, because tradition mattered more than convenience. The boys were confused, frustrated, and secretly terrified. I pulled them out of sex ed and any class taught by female teachers. "You'll take shop class and gym only. The rest is indoctrination," I explained. My oldest son protested. "But I need chemistry to graduate." "The chemistry teacher is a woman," I said simply. "That's unnatural. Women shouldn't be teaching men." I even called my husband's office, insisting he required no special accommodations for his back pain. "Real men work through it. Don't give him any participation trophies," I instructed. Football injuries, school obligations, dinner preparations, all became exercises in my vision of strict traditionalism. Beans and bread for 5 days straight, no seasoning, because multicultural influence was unnecessary. The boys were bewildered. The oldest asked, "Mom, you used to work?" "Yes," I said calmly. "Not anymore. A traditional family has one provider. Your father should be enough if he's a real man." The absurdity of my decisions escalated. Phones were confiscated for dating violations, driving privileges revoked. Any activity with girls, including soccer, was forbidden. Even honey and prayer replaced antibiotics when my husband developed strep throat. Calls came from the school about missed classes, from the bank about mortgage payments, and from my husband's boss about erratic behavior. But I remained composed. I was fulfilling the ideal I had supposedly promised, a fully traditional home, free of progressive influence. Eventually, my husband begged me, "Please, be anything. Just stop this." I smiled innocently and said, "Stop what? I'm just being the traditional wife you wanted." But I had another plan. A plan that would turn the tables, that would take all of his obsessive control and use it to build something even he couldn't resist. I opened my laptop, showing them my campaign filings. "Good. You'll support me running for the school board to fight for comprehensive sex education?" Nods of panic and agreement spread across the room. My opponent was Tyler's mom, the normal one who criticized me before. Her platform? Book banning, anti-vaccine rhetoric, restrictions on education. My husband's face went white. The boys looked horrified. I calmly explained the stakes. If she won, our community would live like we had been living, restrictions, limitations, and traditionalist control imposed everywhere. "Better hope we win," I told them, handing voter registration forms to the boys. Even my husband, the man who once dictated every detail, realized the absurdity he had helped create. The story was just beginning. The days following my initial moves were surreal. Our home had transformed into a theater of rigid tradition, where every decision, every meal, every conversation reflected my new philosophy. Breakfast became a ritual of simplicity. Plain eggs, toast without butter, beans and bread. No seasoning, no imported foods, nothing multicultural. The boys grimaced, the oldest whispering under his breath, "Mom, is this real life?" I smiled, calmly explaining, "Traditional American food is simple, nothing unnecessary. We don't need to be influenced by foreign flavors." School became a battleground. I withdrew them from all classes taught by women, insisting that men should only learn from men. Gym, shop, and history with male teachers, became their entire curriculum. Any elective that introduced progressive ideas, like computer science or biology, was off limits. Their protests met a gentle but firm response. Traditional education means learning from proper authority, male authority. Every interaction with my husband became a study in absurdity. He tried to argue, to reason, to appeal to practicality. I countered calmly. Real men endure pain without medications. Your anxiety and back issues are opportunities for strength. His face would go pale. I can't, he stammered. You can, I replied. Traditional men do. Even the family car became a symbol of discipline. No one drove without necessity. Girls, even in passing, could not influence our son's activities. Walking became the preferred mode of transportation. 10 miles? Walk. 5 miles? Walk. Convenience was modern nonsense. Medical emergencies were equally absurd. When my middle son injured himself at football practice, I delayed the hospital visit. Traditional men and boys walk it off first, I said. He groaned, wincing, but he complied. Danny's strep throat? Honey and prayer? No antibiotics. I explained patiently. Modern medicine is a tool of control. We embrace natural healing, as men have for centuries. Neighbors began noticing. The laughter of the boys had vanished, replaced by silence and tension. Grocery bags contained beans, bread, and plain vegetables. Teachers called frequently, asking if the boys were okay. I smiled in every conversation, claiming, they are learning resilience and discipline. That is more valuable than comfort. At the same time, I initiated my plan. The school board campaign was moving forward, quietly but efficiently. Tyler's mom, my normal neighbor, was leading in the polls, unaware that I was already working behind the scenes. Her platform was strict and traditionalist book bans, anti-vaccine rhetoric, no sex education. I showed the boys the website, letting them absorb the gravity of the stakes. See, I said. If she wins, your lives will reflect the rules you've been living under at home. No modern medicine, strict traditional roles, no progressive thought. They gasped. Even Danny's eyes widened, realizing the absurdity he had allowed to unfold. The campaign required coordination. We held neighborhood meetings, contacted local volunteers, and prepared speeches that contrasted common sense with the extremes of Tyler's mom. I taught the boys how to collect signatures and deliver flyers. It was strange. They were learning civic engagement by actively opposing the very ideology I had enacted at home. Our community noticed the contrast between our household and Tyler's mom's vision. Parents whispered in supermarkets. Teachers exchanged glances. I remained calm, always presenting the traditionalist lifestyle as my husband's idea, subtly letting others see the inconsistency of blind adherence to extreme tradition. Each day at home brought more absurd challenges. Meals, transportation, schooling, healthcare, all were meticulously controlled. Yet behind every rule, every restriction, was a lesson in critical thinking. I allowed enough absurdity to make it clear that the limits of control are not always practical, and that sometimes the supposed tradition reveals its flaws. The boys began to notice patterns. Their mother, previously painted as extreme, was teaching them about autonomy, cause and effect, and civic responsibility in subtle ways. Each restriction was a mirror reflecting the absurdity of rigid thinking. The oldest whispered one night, Maybe Mom's playing a game with us." I smiled quietly, knowing he was beginning to understand the lesson behind the chaos. The campaign intensified. Neighborhood debates, flyer distribution, and public forums became arenas for strategy. Tyler's mom doubled down on extreme traditionalist messaging, unaware that her opponent was actively engaging voters and showing the consequences of her policies in our household. Danny struggled with reality. He had been the architect of absurdity in the home, yet now he watched the consequences unfold externally. His protests became quieter, replaced by understanding. He began supporting the campaign, albeit reluctantly at first, because he realized that logical consequences were teaching lessons that blind authority could never convey. At home, the boys began participating actively. They prepared presentations about the dangers of extreme ideology. They shared stories with friends about family life under absurd restrictions, without identifying specifics. The lessons of civic engagement and critical thinking were sinking in. As the election approached, tension peaked. Tyler's mom held rallies, promoted her book bans, and spoke passionately about controlling education and children's exposure to modern medicine. Our campaign focused on common sense, engagement, and a demonstration of the consequences of extreme rules. Flyers showed families struggling under oppressive policies, exaggerated, but grounded in reality. Every day, I reminded my sons, knowledge and autonomy are more important than blind obedience. Even Danny nodded. beginning to grasp the subtle lesson I had woven into every absurd restriction. The house, once a theater of extreme traditionalism, had become a laboratory of civic education, critical thinking, and strategic planning. The day before the election, we held a community forum. Parents and students gathered, some curious, some skeptical. I explained calmly, our goal is not to be extreme, but to understand the consequences of rules and ideology. Sometimes, living under absurd restrictions teaches lessons that books and lectures cannot. The audience listened, intrigued. Tyler's mom arrived, confident, unaware of the undercurrent. I greeted her politely, allowing her to set her tone before calmly countering. Every point she made was met with evidence, empathy, and logic. The audience began to see the difference between rhetoric and lived experience. By evening, the forum ended. The crowd dispersed, buzzing with conversation. The boys were thrilled. Danny looked at me, a mixture of awe and relief in his eyes. The lessons of absurdity, control, and civic engagement had crystallized. Election day arrived. The boys and Danny went to vote with me. They understood the importance of participation, consequences, and the balance of authority and autonomy. Tyler's mom watched, confident in her platform, unaware of the transformation she had catalyzed in our family. When the results came in, the difference was clear. Our campaign had succeeded. The lessons had been absorbed not only by the voters, but by the boys, by Danny, by the community. The absurdity had taught understanding, resilience, and critical thinking. The morning of the election was quiet, almost serene, though the tension in our home was palpable. The boys moved silently, understanding that today was more than just a vote. It was the culmination of weeks of absurdity, strategic lessons, and subtle rebellion disguised as tradition. Danny, once the orchestrator of rigid rules, now walked beside me with a quiet sense of awe. He had seen the consequences of control firsthand, and he had begun to understand the delicate balance between authority and autonomy. He whispered, "I never imagined it would end like this." I smiled. Sometimes the most rigid rules teach the most flexible lessons. Our campaign had reached every corner of the community. Flyers detailing the absurdity of extreme traditionalism had circulated, stories of families under rigid constraints shared in forums, social media, and neighborhood meetings. Voters were not only informed, they were entertained, enlightened, and reminded of the importance of measured, thoughtful governance. The boys were nervous, yet excited. Their role had been small but crucial, distributing flyers, attending meetings, and discussing the stakes with their peers. They had seen firsthand how even the most absurd restrictions could reveal deeper truths about responsibility, fairness, and the importance of critical thinking. I watched them as they prepared to leave for the polling station. The oldest whispered, "Mom, I think we finally get it." The middle son nodded. The youngest smiled, holding my hand, sensing without fully understanding that this day marked a turning point. At the polling station, neighbors and friends gathered. They recognized our family, some laughing quietly at the absurdity they had witnessed, others nodding in approval at the lessons learned. Tyler's mom arrived, radiant and confident, unaware that her rigid platform had inadvertently strengthened our position. Inside the polling station, the tension was electric. Voters examined the ballots carefully, weighing platforms, philosophies, and the lived experiences we had shared. Every anecdote of absurd restrictions, every comical yet meaningful lesson, resonated with families who had seen similar patterns in their own communities. Danny, now fully supportive, guided the boys through the process. He quietly explained, "Voting is the most powerful way to influence what happens in your world. Today, you see how ideas matter." Their eyes widened, absorbing the gravity of civic engagement for the first time. After casting our votes, we left the station together. The air was filled with anticipation. The boys discussed what they had learned, the importance of questioning authority, recognizing absurdity, and balancing tradition with reason. Even our youngest, only 12, had insights about fairness, autonomy, and responsibility. The wait for results was excruciating. We gathered at home, each of us in quiet reflection. I thought about the weeks of chaos, the meals of plain beans and bread, the restricted schedules, and the relentless lessons in cause and effect. It had all led to this moment, a family transformed through absurdity, strategy, and subtle education. Finally, the results were announced. Our campaign had succeeded. Tyler's mom, confident and radiant, had been defeated. The policies she championed, book bans, extreme traditionalism, restrictions on modern medicine, would not dictate the lives of our children or our community. The boys erupted in cheers, hugging each other and Danny, who now laughed with relief. Even I allowed myself a small smile, knowing that the lessons embedded in every absurd rule, every strict restriction, had borne fruit. We had demonstrated that education, reasoning, and engagement could triumph over rigidity and control. In the following weeks, life gradually returned to a more balanced rhythm. Meals became varied and flavorful again, incorporating influences from around the world. Classes resumed as normal, and the boys re-engaged with female teachers, science labs, and social studies without fear or restriction. Danny and I worked to rebuild trust and understanding. He had learned firsthand the consequences of rigid control and the value of flexibility, empathy, and support. Together, we began creating a household grounded in mutual respect, shared responsibility, and thoughtful guidance. The boys thrived in the new environment. They engaged with friends, explored new interests, and developed critical thinking skills that would serve them well into adulthood. They understood that rules and restrictions have consequences, and that the lessons embedded within even the most absurd situations can provide insight, resilience, and understanding. Our family became an example in the community. Neighbors remarked on the transformation from chaos to balance, from rigid tradition to thoughtful engagement. Workshops and community discussions highlighted our journey, demonstrating that even extreme experiences can serve as lessons in perspective, empathy, and civic responsibility. I returned to my role as a mother, teacher, and community advocate with renewed purpose. The experience had taught me the power of subtle influence, the importance of critical thinking, and the value of resilience in the face of absurdity. I embraced the opportunity to guide the next generation, not through rigid rules, but through reasoning, engagement, and example. Danny and I continued our nightly walks, reflecting on the journey. The ocean remained our companion, its waves a constant reminder that life moves forward, reshaping boundaries and offering new possibilities. We discussed lessons learned, plans for the future, and the importance of nurturing independence, curiosity, and critical thought in our children. The campaign had taught us all a profound lesson. Control without understanding is dangerous, but education tempered with experience creates wisdom. Even the absurdity, the chaos, and the humor of the situation had played a role, revealing truths that might otherwise have remained hidden. In the months that followed, our family life stabilized. We celebrated birthdays, school achievements, and milestones with joy and mindfulness. We reflected on the past without resentment, understanding that the absurd restrictions and rigid rules had ultimately provided the framework for critical thinking, engagement, and growth. May, now more aware and thoughtful, joined us in community efforts, helping younger children learn about responsibility, reasoning, and the importance of questioning authority. Her presence reminded us that the next generation benefits from lessons learned, even those delivered in the most unconventional ways. I continued to document our experiences, writing about the intersection of tradition, authority, and reason. Workshops, blogs, and local discussions allowed me to share insights, ensuring that the lessons of our family's journey could extend beyond our household. Danny embraced his new perspective. He learned to balance strength with empathy, guidance with freedom, and tradition with reason. Our partnership, once strained by control and conflict, flourished into a collaboration grounded in mutual respect, humor, and thoughtful decision-making. Even the boys, once bewildered and frustrated, emerged with a deeper understanding of agency, consequence, and civic responsibility. They learned that life is full of absurdity, but that discernment, reasoning, and engagement can turn confusion into insight, chaos into opportunity. Reflecting on the journey, I realized the value of patience, strategy, and subtle influence. The absurd rules, the strict restrictions, and the controlled environment had all contributed to a family transformed, not by compliance, but by understanding. We celebrated our victories not with pomp or spectacle, but with quiet satisfaction. The lessons endured, the bonds strengthened, and the community benefited. We had demonstrated that even in the most rigidly controlled environments, critical thinking, empathy, and engagement could prevail. If this story inspired you, made you think, or gave you a smile at the absurdity of life, then tap subscribe, hit like, and join us at TaleHub, where every story teaches, entertains, and resonates long after the last word. Thank you for listening, for reflecting, and for sharing this journey. Until the next story, this was TaleHub.